Welcome to Mike's Podcast Club for April. This is our Back to Basics event, not just for brand new podcasters either. We have got some of our wonderful community members here to talk to you about different aspects of making a podcast, and we're going to try and demystify some of those myths that are out there on the internet. I know that there's so much information out there as to how you can go ahead and start a podcast, but what we thought we'd do is get our wonderful community members to tell you how they do it so that you can learn from people who have the experience. And not just that, but if you're here and you also have an experience on any of the stuff that we're talking about, there's always going to be space for you to pop your hand up and say, here's my bit of sharing that I'd like to do with this, and to join in, essentially, which is what we want to do. So my name's Charles, and Vic is here as well. She'll be waving right now, which is lovely. And we are basically going to be going through two sections. So we're going to start now, and then about maybe we try and do it around 7 o'clock. We'll have a little break for you to go and refill your glasses and have any comfort breaks that you might need to. So don't worry about missing anything. As I said, we are recording this. You'll be able to watch a nice replay as well. Please do have a look at what's going on in the chat and have a chat with each other as well. If you've got a podcast, share it in the chat. We always love to see what people are doing and have a listen to all the wonderful bits of audio that our community are making. And anything else that you want to put in there, if you want to put in social media links or anything like that, then go for it. The magic sometimes happens in the chat. If you've got a question for any part of this evening, then just type it into the chat. Just prefix it with a hashtag and the word question, and then we'll be able to actually add it to the list of questions. We've got a sheet. It's all magic, and we'll collate it and then make sure that the question can be asked. Just a little bit of admin. We're also on Twitter. Go to @Mike's Podcast Club. That's MICS Podcast Club, or hashtag your socials with hashtag Mike's Podcast Club as well. There will be a replay that will be on YouTube. So our YouTube channel is, funnily enough, Mike's Podcast Club. Go and subscribe. We've got 10 subscribers at the minute. We've got how many people in the room? Several. We can at least double that number to 20, I reckon, tonight. That would be absolutely brilliant. And finally, and I should say with that recording, if you don't want to be seen on camera at some point, then take the necessary steps to make sure that you're not going to be seen. But finally, although the event is free, it's not free for us to put on. It does take a bit of effort, a bit of time. So we're posting our Buy Me a Coffee link in the chat, and you can donate to the running of Mike's Podcast Club. It's basically buymeacoffee.com/Mike's Podcast Club. So you can just pop that into your browser and then donate by buying us 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe even a whole load of caffeine in a coffee cup, which will help us go towards putting this on. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Vic. I'm just going to pop over to Vic and say hello and let Vic take control. Hi, Vic.
Hello, thank you, Charles, for that lovely introduction. What an absolute pro you are. I don't need to laugh at that. You honestly sounded really, really good. Welcome to Mike's Podcast Club, Back to Basics. So we are going to go through the main steps of starting a podcast. And what I've done is a complete schoolboy error in starting a podcast, and doing this for you today is I've not closed my window. So there is this really annoying Yorkshire Terrier across the road who just barks his ass off. And it's going to happen all the way through. So when we have that little break at near 7 o'clock, I'm going to close my window because that dog is annoying. So how we're going to work this is that I've asked some people from the Mike's Podcast Club community to give their 2 top tips on the main bits of starting a podcast. So we're going to go to those guys, and then we'll open it up to the floor. So if you've got a burning question at any of these stages about starting a podcast, pop it in the chat, and us as a community we'll give you some advice. It's simple. It's a simple premise. So the reason why we wanted to do this back to basics was that if you Google how to start a podcast, or you go on some of the popular Facebook groups about how to start a podcast, you get a flurry of manana. And all that, it's conflicting them. And one person says manana, and you go, oh, no, and it's a bit no. So we wanted to do this as to demystify the steps of starting a podcast. And so take notes, but we were also recording this. So, and I also wanted to do, I say this all the time, I also wanted to do this so we could get expert advice live from the horse's mouth, from the experts that are living and breathing podcasts every single day, which is us lot. So where better place to start than at the very, very beginning of starting a podcast. And where one of the questions I get asked loads about podcasts is, where do I start? And we have got the Where Do I Start Queen to give you her top two tips of where to bloody start when it comes to podcasting. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Charlotte Foster. Woo, 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 woo.
I mean, that's a raucous round of applause and I'm loving it. Thank you very much. Woo, woo.
Oh, so I should say it's Charlotte Foster from Charlotte Foster Podcast. Sorry, I didn't get the introduction right.
I'm so creative. I just added podcast to the end of my name to create my business name and then try and tell everyone I'm a really creative person. Can you imagine how hard to sell that is now? I thought my name was a brand. That's hilarious. Right. So this is going to sound really weird for how do you start a podcast? But my first and probably the biggest bit of advice I'd give is know how you're going to end your podcast. Have an exit strategy before you record an episode, which sounds ridiculous, I know. But if you don't know how you're going to finish, you will possibly end up doing an ongoing weekly podcast for the rest of your life and start hating it. And what will happen is you'll get really into what's known as pod fade. So you'll start out, you'll do 3, 4, maybe get to 7. 7's kind of like the magic number. You'll do a few of those episodes and then you're like, oh God, you mean I've got to do this forever? And then you'll just stop. Whereas if you start and go, do you know what? I'm going to give this a go. I think I've got maybe 10 episodes that I can get out of this. You've got your exit strategy started before you even finish. And you know what's going on. And you know that you can do 10 episodes, however many it is. And you know the commitment that you've got. And then you can do another episode, another series, and another series, and another series. But there's no pressure on you, or there's less pressure on you. As Charles says, a weekly podcast, that sounds hard. Yes, it is when you don't know how you're going to finish and you don't know how you're going to come back from it. So that's my first tip. Have an exit strategy. My second tip is don't do what I did when I first started my very first podcast. Now, my background's working in radio, so you can guess what I'm about to say. I planned my first podcast like it was going to be a Radio 4 award-winning documentary. There was so much in it. It was complex beyond complexity. And I didn't do anything with it because it was too difficult. Charles, it was bloody amazing, right? This award-winning Radio 4 documentary that I was about to produce. Instead, I threw all that out because I had a deadline that couldn't be moved. They're great, they are. So my first podcast was a podcast about culture in Stoke-on-Trent. Do all the laughing you want to. It was a really popular podcast and there is culture in Stoke-on-Trent and I'll fight anyone to the death to prove that. And I knew that the City of Culture bid was being announced and that Stoke-on-Trent was going to be on the shortlist for it. So what better time to launch the podcast than that weekend off the back of it? So I had no choice but to just go out with my mobile phone and record the podcast that way. And actually, it was a much better podcast for doing that because I wasn't hung up on all of the singing and dancing. And it was a fun, raw, not bad raw, good raw podcast that went on for 2 years and arguably is the reason I have a business today. So have an exit strategy. I didn't have an exit strategy. And don't over plan it and make it too complex, but do plan some things. And I'll stop my TED talk now. Thank you very much.
Oh God, I mean, not making it too complicated. Ian, who's not here tonight, posted a link on, we've got a Facebook group I'll tell you about in a bit, posted a link to some tips that's I can't remember his name now, some dude had put about keeping your episode simple, so in discussing one thing per episode. I think we've got a tendency as humans to cram everything in the same, like cram loads of features in, and then that sometimes can create pod burn and pod fade, can't it, Charlotte?
Yeah. So for my first podcast, it was a 15-minute conversation with someone about something they were doing in Stoke-on-Trent. One guest, 15 minutes was the maximum it was ever going to be. And if it was longer than that and it was worth it, it got 2 episodes. That's how harsh I was. And you don't need to be that harsh on the timing, but Radio Brain said I had to be at that point. So, and that's what it was. It was just one conversation about one thing that was happening in the city at the time. And that also meant it was easy to produce on a week-by-week basis and it was easy for people to listen to as well because it wasn't confusing for them.
Yeah. Yes, that's another thing as well. As well as it being easy for you to consume, then it's easy for the listener to consume as well, because they're not trying to like
What's going on here? What's going on here?
Yeah,
what's that noise? What's that?
Yeah.
Who are you? Why are you here? In radio, there's a whole sort of thing about one thought, one link kind of thing. Maybe not quite one thought, one podcast, but one theme, one episode is probably a good way of thinking about it. Or one idea, one episode.
It's the KISS. Keep it simple, stupid.
Rude.
You love it.
I do. That's why I come back every time.
So I'm quizzing you now, Charlotte.
No.
It's Charlotte Foster podcast. What else is in this planning bit?
So I think of, I like to make myself sound cool by mentioning Netflix. So you want to plan your podcast like Netflix plans its, well, it doesn't accept stuff from production companies, but like Netflix plans a box series, a box set kind of thing. So The Crown, think about that. It's arguably, you can sum that up as it's the life of Elizabeth II. But each series has a different element of that life. And each series has a theme to it. So the first one was all about becoming queen. The second one was the relationship of her and Princess Margaret, #Team Margaret. Then like the last series was told through the relationship of Charles and Diana, and it's going to be more. So each series has a theme. Each episode has an idea, a part of that. So think about your podcast that way, because you want people to go from one episode to the next episode and it to make sense, like chapters in a book. So know what you're doing for the next episode and know what you've done for your previous episode. And if you can, write down however many episodes you want to do, or the next sort of, 4 or 5, know what you're doing so that it kind of makes sense. And you want people to pick up the next one and not go, who are you? What's this? This sounds completely different to what I've just heard. Because I love binge listening to podcast series. I love it. I'm the queen of it. I'll go out and do walks just so I can listen to lots of podcasts.
Yeah.
So make sure that it makes sense and they follow on. They don't have to be like a chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but they need to follow on nicely.
It's like Coronation Street. If you ever dip into Coronation Street, you're not a Coronation Street fan, you'll pick it up after a week. You're like, I get it now.
Yes.
She's sleeping with her. He's doing that. And he's doing that. I get that. Brilliant. Maybe not to that extreme, but like, that was a vibe I was going for. How important is thinking about your audience at this stage of the very start of podcasting?
Absolutely important. Absolutely. You should always be thinking about your audience. Your podcast is not for you, it's for your audience. You can't be too selfish when it comes to a podcast. When I used to work at the BBC, I had a lovely little badge, my little visitor, my ID badge. And at the bottom, at the other side of it, I used to do this in morning meetings all the time. You can imagine, can't you? When someone's trying to pitch a story idea, I'd sit there and go, why is it relevant to the audience? And that's why I no longer work at the BBC. And they got rid of me for being difficult. Seriously. Oh, this is going on YouTube, isn't it? Oh, well.
we can take it out.
Edit that bit out. No, don't worry. But I used to turn around, and honestly, it's like the core values is audience is at the heart of everything we do. And I think that's one thing I will always take from the BBC. The audience is at the heart of my podcast. Every time I'm writing or planning a podcast, I'm like, who is listening to this? Why are they listening to this? What problem am I solving for them? And when I say problem, I don't necessarily mean it's like it's not an educational problem necessarily. It's not a YouTube tutorial, because the problem can be, I'm bored. That's a problem. So I want to be entertained. And I want to be, oh God, I'm going all Lord Reef, entertain, educate, and inform. It's not a bad strategy. And I think podcasts have the ability to do that a little bit more than video do. Podcasts naturally lend themselves to longer form. And so you can go in a little bit and you can have more personality. You can have fun with it. So I would always say, always know who you're talking to and why you're talking to them. That's important.
What would you say to someone that says, my podcast is about everyone, anything and everything, and it's for anyone that likes stuff? Like,
I would say good luck getting anyone to listen to it. Because it's that whole, if you're there for everybody, you're there for nobody, really. It sounds ridiculous, but you go on. So let's go back to Netflix, right? You've got stuff on there that which will absolutely split people away. Someone's not going to. My new favorite program is This Cake. Absolutely, my husband hates it with a passion because probably for the same reason I love it. It's terrible, but I will sit and watch it because I like a cake. And you know what? But that's going to split someone. And you know what? It's okay not to like it or want it, but it's going to have an audience. A podcast about culture in Stoke-on-Trent is not likely to interest a lot of people. There's many, it's if you're not interested in culture and you're not interested in like maybe a bit of tourism or anything like tourism in Stoke-on-Trent. But it's a niche subject. It's you're not gonna. It's not the hugest of audiences. But what was good about it was a lovely community that was created, and I had a lot of engaged listeners. So I'd get people listening in, I think every continent. I loved that. I loved that every continent on the planet had heard my podcast. So about Stoke-on-Trent, and you had expats. It was big in Japan because Japanese people liked anything about ceramics, apparently. So whenever I did any of the potteries, then it would just spike in Japan. It was brilliant. But I'd get messages from across the world going, oh, thank you for just, giving me a bit of home back. Or my mum was from Stoke. I never lived there, but I'm feeling like I'm getting to know my mum through your podcast. I know, right? Oh, and then people living in the city would go, I never knew that happened down the road from me. I'm going to go and find out about it. So that to me is more important than having huge numbers of listeners. It's the engaged numbers of listeners. That to me is where it really belongs to me.
So I'm going to put it out now, Charlotte. Thank you so much for your insight. I really love it when you talk podcasting.
I talk a lot. I can just go and get a gin and just relax. Charlotte will talk.
I was like, I agree so much. You're so insightful. You're very wise, and I love it.
Can I use that as a testimonial? Thank you.
Yeah, you can.
I'm going to cut it off.
Very wise. Like a podcasting owl.
Podcasting owl.
There you go. Right.
That's mine. I'm going to back that up in Canva with an owl.
You can do. Any podcasters here? What does your planning process look like? Can I get a hand up for anyone that wants to share that with us? Give me an insight into your world, podcasters. Deepa.
I'm really new, so I can tell you what I'm doing because I'm also brand new to Manchester, and my podcast is called Meet the Mancunian. So go figure. I'm using it to explore the city. But I don't actually plan my guests. My guests introduce me to other guests. That's how so it's very much a referral network. I am in season 2, so and recorded about 23 guests so far. So I guess something's going right with that. What I'd say, and this is something I learned in the course, I did a Sonder radio podcasting course last year, so I'm that new. It was last September. But basically what they suggested, and that really has worked out for me, is work a few weeks ahead. So I'm working about 7 or 8 episodes ahead. That I'm a communications professional working with the public sector. It's pretty busy. There are weeks where either my guests are not available or I'm busy. And that just helps you have that Tuesday, I have a Tuesday 8 a.m. schedule for my podcast. So I guess that's one thing I'd say, for it, plan as much ahead and use the network. Depending on mine's an interview style podcast about Mancunians making social impact. So I obviously need to find that profile of guests and also politely find a way to decline introductions, which are not quite.
So that's interesting. How do you decline guests?
I have had to decline at least 4 because, I've just told them it doesn't quite work. You're doing some amazing work, but you're either doing something on a more commercial level or it's not quite fitting with what.
It's not me, it's you. Oh, that's the wrong way around. It's the wrong way around.
I guess I just try to be very polite about it, but just say thank you so much, but it's not quite right for my show.
And so what software are you using to plan? Do you have a nice, sexy spreadsheet like I do?
I started off with that, and now I kind of end up with between Apple Notes and I guess in my mind. So some of this is just, I'm not really doing it in a very scientific way. I probably should. And I'd love that.
Fine though. It's
one of the reasons I've come here just to learn. So what's the best practice? Because I'm still figuring out life. It's so new for me. But I use Anchor and Zoom. So Zoom to record, Reaper to edit, and then Anchor to host the podcast. So that's kind of, I guess, the software I'm using.
I think when it comes to planning and getting stuff, I'm very particular. I'm very, very detailed. So I like a lot of systems, but some people's brains don't work like that. And I know people who flick through like voice recorder, notes, and it's whatever sits comfortable in your brain, I think it is. Deepa, thanks so much for sharing. So at this stage in podcasting, the pre-production stage, you are planning, you are figuring out who your audience is, you're figuring out what the hell your podcast is about. You're also considering like scheduling, like, have I got enough time in my life to actually podcast? And then fitting in how often do I do that as well? One of the biggest questions we get asked in podcasting is how long should my podcast be? Does anyone have any thoughts on the length? Yes, Charlotte Foster, coming to you, all the way from Wales.
Almost Wales.
Almost Wales.
I can see Wales from the room, but I'm not quite in it. I'm 2 miles away. 2 miles. They're very important 2 miles, believe me.
So what I was going to say, what continent, what county are you in?
I'm in Shropshire. I'm in Oswestry.
Lovely.
But the village I live in sounds very Welsh, to the point that it was my husband's birthday on Monday and no one got our address correct because they couldn't spell it. Not enough consonants for the English. A podcast should be as long as it is interesting. Full stop. That is all.
No longer than it needs to be, no shorter than it needs to be. Also, linked with that is that you know your audience. If your audience, you're doing a podcast with a bunch of teenagers, are they going to listen to a 40-minute interview? Like, you know what and you'll get to know that better when you look at your stats when you start podcasting. You'll learn that you'll see stats to know when people start cutting off, and then you can start tweaking that content to match those stats as well. Okay, right then. So how often? Yeah, we'll know what size it is. How often should we be podcasting? How often should I release my podcast? Charlotte Foster.
There are other people here, but I like to take the spotlight.
I love it when you do.
You decide for yourself what you can be consistent with, but consistency is the key. So if you're going to podcast once a month on the first or the second or the third, whatever it is of that month, you do that. If you're going to podcast once a week, you make sure it's the same day every week. If you can do it fortnightly, you do it fortnightly. Whatever you say to your audience you're going to do, you do. But it's up to you what you do. Or you could, if you're doing a series, just do a series drop. Boom.
What, like all series?
The whole series, yeah. All the podcasts in one go. Let everyone binge it on their own term.
Whoa.
Why wouldn't you?
I've heard of like releasing 2 because that's good for the stats because people listen again. It looks like a spike.
I did it with a client last year. She does a podcast for teenagers and young people, and not so young people, young at heart, we call them. And she was so clever about this. She did the intro and outro for every episode, and then she got her daughter to do the interviews because her daughter's young, so that's better for her. But it was basically LGBT stories but her daughter came out to her on the podcast episode that they did together. So they discussed that together, which was a really lovely one. And we just said, let's put them all out in one go, because there's different stories from different people, different genders, different sexuality and all that. And I said, people want to find the one that they're interested in first, and then they'll go and listen to the others. So we launched them all on one day. We did lots of promotion throughout, like for a long time, about them all being there, but we just dropped them all on one day and let people find it and pick and choose which ones they wanted to listen to. And because it's nice and evergreen as well, so there's no kind of dating to it, as in, we did it, and it's, we still refer to it. So I think there was not too long ago, it was the day of transgender awareness, or no, visibility, wasn't it? So we pushed out the episode about the transgender episode. We pushed that one out on that day, and we were able to, and it keeps bringing new people to it. We just put them all out in one go, and it was a really interesting way of doing it, and I thought it worked really well.
Wow. Did it have Lindsay's asked a question in chat, did it have any, because there's nothing to compare it to really, but did it have any impact on stats? Did you notice any?
Obviously we spiked really early because there were 10 episodes that people could listen to straight away. So it could have been one person listening to 10 episodes. So the episodes, it gave, and if you want to play the charts, that's a way that you can do it, because it's the interest, it's all of that. But that wasn't what we were doing it for. It was literally just to make sure all the information was out there in one go and people could go. So yeah, I think it had an impact. But what's been nice is it still gets listens. It's still, people turn up to it and find it, and it's there, in the same way that podcasts work like that. So but it had a big impact to start with, big sort of spike, got in the charts, and you can then, it's like the Kindle 99p first day when you book kind of thing. I'm an Amazon bestseller. We got in the sexuality and relationships chart. There's some strange episodes in that chart.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's a place. Don't want to hang out there too much.
But that's a whole different conversation about playing the charts and what constitutes a chart in Apple Podcasts.
I personally don't think chart success is what you should base your podcast on. I think getting messages like, you've brought me closer to my mum, or another podcast series I did about pancreatic cancer, which is really horrible, but it's actually a really lovely podcast series. We did one every day for November because it's Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month. I don't recommend that, and I don't think Charles will disagree with a daily podcast. I at least could record most of mine in advance rather than doing them as a reaction, so at least I had that to play with. But we did an episode on a trial for pancreatic cancer that's going on in Liverpool. It's an early screening one. If you've got family history, 2 people listened to that episode and now on the trial. So that's potentially 2 people having life-saving screening. And that to me, that's better than a number 1 spot in a chart that doesn't stay number 1 for very long.
Yeah.
Any day of the week. So that's why, I'm that soft person that does podcasts for good kind of thing, rather than to make money.
Outcomes versus outputs, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a few more questions on this, on the planning period. Question coming from Steve about audience. Can you plan for the audience you're reaching out to by comparing similar podcast metrics, etc., or just hope that there's a few people who are into what you're podcasting about? Would anyone like to answer that question? Charles?
I'll come in and say hello. So I think it really, you should know who you're wanting to listen to your podcast before you start it. So if you're going to do a podcast about cheese, then you want people that like cheese to listen to that podcast. So you're kind of going to want to know that there is an audience out there for it. I mean, mine was dead simple because I do it for fans of Northampton Town Football Club, but therefore my audience are fans of that football club. It's fairly simple for me to sort of do that. Whereas if you're going to go into it and try and make a podcast that is for everyone, you're going to end up having no one listening because it's not specific enough to anybody and nobody's going to go, that's for me. It's what Charlotte was saying about, getting those things for, nice comments back and things like that. You want to really speak to the people that you're making your podcast for. So I would definitely go and see, like going to, say, the Apple Podcast library, go and look through and see, are there other podcasts about the same topic that you want to do a podcast in? I would look, that will tell you whether there's an audience straight away, because I guarantee whatever it is, if you want to do a podcast about horsehair or about, I don't know why I chose that, but anything. A horse went past and I just couldn't resist.
No way, where are you living?
Yeah, in Warrington. We've got little stables out the back, I rent it out to them. But anything that you wanted to do is going to be in Apple Podcast more than likely, unless you found some ridiculously small niche that not even I've heard of. Then you can see that there's already an audience for it. I would recommend that you actually go and listen to a few of those podcasts that are there, so that you can find the angle that you're going to take that's going to be slightly different to what they're doing, because you don't want to just go and try and steal listeners from another podcast. There is room for everyone. You just need to find your way of talking about that subject and how you're going to look at it and aim at those people. So I would go and look and see, and you can, good luck comparing metrics. I don't know a single podcast that will be completely 100% honest about their metrics with anybody else. Why would you when they're not openly available? But if you can see things like, oh, okay, that podcast there is at number 3 in the charts, then that's probably the most that you're going to be able to actually get from another podcast. But you'll definitely find that there'll be a podcast out there already doing or speaking about the topic you want to do. So go and have a look and have a listen, see what they do, and if you like it. And there's no horsehair podcast yet, so get on it. Niche it. You can be the king of horsehair. Go.
Thank you, Charles, for that bombshell. We're going to move away from where to start and planning now. Actually, do you know what? I'm going to ask them one more question. This is from Steve H, who we're going to hear from in a bit. How did you decide on the name of your podcast? And does it have any bearing as to the success of one's podcast? Actually, do you know what? I'm going to ask Steve Blears this question, because his gardening podcast, what is it called, Steve?
It's called My Garden Podcast. I think that, when you're coming up with titles, it's really, you think, oh, I'll come up with something creative or wacky. But actually, when it comes to sort of searchability, the title really matters. So I called it My Garden Podcast because I knew the word garden and podcast was something that was searched for. In fact, I should have called it My Gardening Podcast because people search for gardening podcasts. So I think, that's the way I like to do it. I think that it's a great idea to just kind of say what it is. It's not very kind of cool, but I think it certainly helps with the sort of audience.
Yeah. And you're a bit of a search
SEO geek.
Yeah, a geek, a massive geek. So you know that.
Well,
what it says in the tin.
There's a really big, sorry to talk about gardening podcast. There's a really big one, which is the Royal Horticultural Society. Like, they're massive, and they've got loads of great SEO and loads of information about gardening on the website. And I made it my kind of thing to try and beat them at SEO, because I just thought their podcast is so boring, and it's so worthy, and it's so like just kind of full of facts and Latin words. I just thought, this is just so boring. I want to do something that's a bit more fun. So I made it my kind of purpose to try and beat them with SEO. And I'm nearly there. I'm on page 1. We're both on page 1 of Google search. And it makes a big, if you get good SEO, it makes a big, big difference. Most of my plays come through a website, not through the players like Spotify and that kind of thing. All the people that find my podcast find it through Google search. So name-wise, say what it is, and is what you want to make a podcast about searchable? Are people actually looking for what you want to make? I think if you can crack that, then I think you've kind of that's half of the battle. If you, by all means, podcasting is about being niche and kind of very sort of detailed interest. That's great. But are people actually looking for it? And are you going to call it the most looked for thing in that sort of niche? Would be my tips.
Thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, it makes complete sense. Ant McGinley, who comes who's part of our community, when he does his podcasting talk that he does, how to start a podcast from scratch, can't speak. He asks people, say, well, what should I call it? Have any ideas for names? And he says, well, tell me what Snakes on a Plane's about. And that's how he does it. I've spoiled his shtick now, we won't mind. Okay, so we're going to move on now from the beginning, from the very start. And we're going to go now to when it starts getting a bit more sexy. We put the planning away and we start talking microphones. I don't know why I did it in a really dirty northern voice. Oh, microphones and kits. Oh, get your kits out. It's went weird again, I'm sorry. Yeah. Or we're going to start talking kit. And sometimes when I'm talking kit, I'm like, you don't have to, but my thing is like, you don't have to buy the most delicious, sexy stuff. You can buy like a great microphone that's not going to cost you. Where's mine gone? Oh, I'll hear groans and I'll bring mine up. Mine's on the floor because I'm not using it tonight because I'm a bad one. I've got like, well, you can't see it. It's a snowball. Can't see it. Well, no point doing it. I'm not on the mic very often, so it's all right for what I need to do it for. So Amy Grumble, would you unmute yourself, my love? She runs a really awesome web design company called Two Cows Web Design, but she's also recently launched her very first podcast called My Website Sucks. And so how long? Oh,
help. My website sucks.
Sorry, I did think wrong. Help, my website sucks. And when did it launch?
February the 1st.
So brand new. And I thought Amy would be a brilliant person to speak to about kit. And I asked her to prepare two of her top tips about kit. So do you want to give me your first one, Amy? Or give us your first one?
Yeah, I suppose. Well, I bought my mic just based on Google searches and just recommendations, but I also bought a mic because it helped me sort of put me in the mindset for actually doing the podcast. It made me think, oh, I've got a mic. Oh, now I must do this thing, rather than just using my phone, which I could have easily done. But for me, sitting there with a mic in front of me just seemed to make sense. So I bought this one. What is it? Don't even know what it is. A Samsung. I'm going to read it. Samsung Q2U. There you go. Can you see that? Yeah. And it's got a lovely little stand, which works for me. But one thing I realized is that the stand's quite low. So I'm going to go ultra high tech here. I'm a web designer, so high tech. It's really low down. So when I'm talking like this, but if I put it on some books, I don't have to bend down. It's amazing. I know this is going to sound really sort of lame if you've been doing podcasting for ages, so I can only apologize, but that's been working for me. So books under microphone, and also I think I've heard that it makes everything a bit more stable, perhaps, for your audio. And also I move around a lot when I talk, so it helps me sit still. And I also use, once again, I'm going high tech, and I'll get it, a lovely cushion, and I put it down the side of my screen because it stops me from talking into the wall. There you go. You can have that tip for free, everybody. I realized I was just talking at a blank wall that doesn't have anything on it. So I just tried to make myself a little makeshift booth, like a den that you make when you're a kid. Quite fun. I don't go all the way and put like a little tent around me, but I use cushions. So that's my kit.
Are you using the Q2U now?
I am, but I'm also moving around, so I don't know what it sounds like.
No, it sounds great. The good thing about Q2U, and we are by no means sponsored by Samsung, but if you'd like to put us in contact with a sponsor at Samsung, that'd be great. Is it's both an XLR input and both a USB, so you can have it both analog, well, sort of analog, and digital as well. So you can pop it into a portable recorder and go out and do your shtick. You can also shove it in your computer, and it comes with a stand, but it's very short, like this is very, very short. And all of the USB microphones that come with stands are very short, so you've got to do some elevating. I'm not going to do that anymore. And they come with foams as well. So there's this whole thing about protecting your microphone. Don't have a naked microphone. Never have a naked microphone. You see Caroline, on her microphone, she's got a little foam on the end of hers. James has got a little foam on the end of his. Any more foams? Shows you foams, lads. Steve's got a furry one. He's got a dead cat. Charles is stroking his foam. Owen is doing a typical makeup tutorial hand showing. There you go. Protect your microphones. I tell you for why, right? Humans are right dirty buggers. And they breathe and spit and pop. Lindsay's got a little dead cat, a furry one. And they breathe and spit on microphones. And that shot of air on a microphone is so, it makes you jump. It's not very nice. So protect it. You can also get something that's called a pop filter. And is there any pop filters in the house? Yep. Caroline just brought hers down. What it looks like, it's like a hoop, and it looks like a pair of tights have been stretched over the hoop. And that prevents the pops. Yep, Owen's showing us his pop filter. And I got mine from Amazon for about £5. So you can get all this stuff. And I got a bag of foams. Where's my foams? I got a bag of foams from eBay for like £7, all different colours. So yeah, you can do this on the cheap. If you've not got a foam, use a sock. Steve, Leah, did you not make your own pop?
Hello. Sorry, did you ask me just a question? I was just typing something there.
I think she froze.
Yeah.
Have we lost Vic?
I think she was asking me, did I make my own pop shield? I did, actually. Well remembered. I think I got like a bit of coat hanger and I put it in a kind of loop shape and I put a kind of pair of tights over it or something like that. It worked a treat. So yeah, you don't have to kind of. I mean, actually, I posted it on the Facebook group, and everyone went, "Steve, you can get one for £5." So there we go. I just like making stuff.
Well done, Steve. I love that. Vic has just messaged me. She's her internet's gone. She's just restarting. Amy, you've got a second tip, I believe. Is that true?
No.
No. Oh, well.
No, I mean, I can add something about the planning if that helps.
Go for it. Absolutely.
Why not? Well, my podcast is linked to my business. So I set up the podcast with a view to create a different way of doing frequently asked questions for my website and my clients. So for me, planning was, I like writing things down. I like everything to be clear. And it's a podcast that I speak, just me. So when people are asking about time and how long, I think the longest one I've done was 12 minutes and the shortest was 5 minutes. So for me, that worked for what I wanted to achieve, because each episode is a question and I'm answering the question, and that becomes my frequently asked question for my business. So for me, it was about knowing exactly what I wanted to achieve. And because it was crystal clear, I wasn't going to waffle. I did right at the beginning, and I had meltdowns left, right, and center, thinking, oh, everybody needs to know more. But in the end, you know, less was more for me. So for planning, if you've got a really specific audience in mind, then I think it really helps. It just makes life easier. And don't know if that's really a tip, but that's what I did.
That's great. Thank you very much, Amy. So I'm just going to go and quickly look at this document and see where we're up to, so that I can professionally fill in for Vic. Amy, one of the other bits of equipment that you use, so you've talked about your microphone. What else have you got? Have you got anything else, or is that it, literally? Do you have anything to listen with at all, by any chance?
Ah, yes. The headphone things, yeah? Got it.
The headphone thing, there you go. Well done.
Yeah, I've got some nice headphones. I forget to use them a lot of the time, but I've got 2 pairs of headphones. I've got some fancy ones, and I've got some teeny tiny ones. And the teeny tiny ones I find helps for listening back when I've finished. There you go. I'm modeling them. Beautiful. So do you want me to tell you what they are? Would that be helpful?
Well, I think you make a really good point about what you're saying about listening back, because if you're listening back to them, you want to, I don't know if anybody else does this, but one of my top tips is when you're listening back to your podcast, just before you're basically going to send it out to the world, is to try and listen to it as you expect your audience to listen to it. So if you expect your audience to be listening to it using their phone and probably a pair of earpods, or you know, earphones, whatever you want to call them, then listen back to it on a pair of those. If you're expecting most of your audience to be listening to it in their car on the way to work, because we can do that again now, then go and do that, and just make sure that you can actually hear it the way you want it to be heard. And that's probably my biggest tip with it. You can go and get a big fancy pair of headphones for your editing purposes, because they will potentially give you a much better sound for you to be able to pick up everything that you need to do while you're editing. So for example, I have in my thingy a pair of these, which I think you can see. Yes, so these are a pair of Sony's MDR 7506, and they have studio monitor, I don't know whether you can see that, on the band around here. And basically what that means is that they will be as good as kind of the headphones that you would get in a radio studio, supposedly. And that allows me to hear an awful lot when I'm doing editing, but sometimes those little nuances that you do don't necessarily come across if you're actually just in your AirPods, whatever you want to call them, little earphones. and therefore by going and listening to that, you can see whether your hard work has paid off or not, and done that. So is there anything else that you, Amy, use equipment wise, or is it microphone and headphones? Anything else, any software at all, maybe?
Yeah, so for recording I used Zencaster, and that seemed to work okay. And as I said, I'm a bit of a planner and I like to write everything down. So I write all my notes in Evernote, and I have them side by side. So I'm not reading. I don't like to read what I've written. I just like to have it there as a bit of a crutch, as a bit of a just in case, because I think there's nothing worse than just hearing somebody drivel on, even if it's only 5 or 10 minutes. So I find having it there in front of me quite handy. Zencaster takes a little bit of getting used to if you're not used to that sort of software, and just making sure that all the settings were right. I think it took me a while to work it out, but so settings on microphones as well, settings on everything, just check it all before you hit record. I've had quite a few times where I thought I'd recorded and nothing happened. So yes, learn from my mistakes, everybody. I'm sure we've all been there.
Amy, just I don't want to stop you mid-flow, but just explain.
Just lost
hello.
me.
Sorry, I'm back again. More, I'm surprised. Just
are.
explain what Zencaster is for us, please.
I'll try. I go to the website and I log in, and basically I can record my audio there, and you can see little waves as you talk.
And so do you do that? Oh, so you record yourself on Zencaster?
Yeah, and then I just convert it to MP3 for listening to and sending off to editor, because I haven't produced any of it. For me, it's just so I record myself on it. Is that not normal? I don't know.
Oh, interesting, because I would thought, so I know that people use Zencaster to record remote conversations. So if I was going to have a conversation with someone that wasn't in the same room, and then you'd record yourself into a digital audio workspace, like some editing software. So that's an interesting way around that you're doing that.
You can record your video as well if you really want to. If you want to see your face while you're talking, you can record that. I haven't done that. I think there's no need for it, because I much prefer seeing the little wiggly lines. Much more interesting.
Yeah. And one of the tips there as well, and I do it all the time. I do it more times than I should, really, which is really bad because I do this as a business, is forgetting to press record. And there's one way that you can, that you're recording. If the numbers are moving, get a recording. Or if the waves are moving, you're recording. Just a little glance down, you can notice that you're recording. You'll make that mistake. Well, I'm going to say you'll make that mistake once. You won't. I'm not going to feel like times. And for what you're doing, you've got the kit that you need for what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know what else I would need personally. At the moment, as I say, it's me talking into a microphone for a few minutes about something website related, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I have no plans for guests. That's not the style of podcast I decided to do. But I imagine there's lots of kit and gadgets I could buy, but at the moment, I'm all right.
Yeah. Oh, thanks so much for sharing, Amy.
No
really
problem.
Appreciate that. Would anyone like to share how they prep guests, remote recording guests? Is there anything that you send them, or is there anything you ask of them to make sure that their audio is recorded fantastically? Caroline.
So I remote record guests on Riverside, which is, again, it's a web-based platform. I can send them a link. It's much like Zoom, only the quality of the recording is better when it works. So I will send them an automated email once they sort of book in the time. I will then send them an email which will say, this is how it works. This is what you need. This, be in a quiet room, try and be in a room that has got lots of soft furnishings as opposed to sitting in an office. Your lounge is great, that kind of thing, to kind of prep them for that. And then I always say, because the podcasts that I've been working on have all been quite chilled out and quite relaxed. It will just be a chat. Please don't panic. We can re-record over anything if you're not happy with anything. It's it's just a chat. And when I actually start the recording, I do make a point of, rather than if I was doing a radio interview, you might start it like, right, we're starting the recording now. We're like, it is very much like, every time I'm going to click record now in case I forget, just to try and keep it as sort of casual and relaxed as possible, because a lot of the people that I'm talking to haven't done interviews before, and the idea of doing an interview for them is really terrifying. So it's just to try and calm them and relax them down before we start.
Yeah, that's really important. You want to get, when you're interviewing or having guests, like Caroline said, loads of people that we'll talk to are normal people. They're not on the round of promoting a film or a book or an album. So especially when you get them online and they've never done an interview before, and they can come a bit like this, and you say to them, oh, it's fine, it's not live. I'm going to edit it. Oh God, you're going to edit it? Yeah, I'm going to edit it. You can go back and say something again. Can I? I used to have a bit of banter with them, get them a bit chill, and then I'm going to record now. And then so instead of going straight into it, they're like this, and maybe you're going straight into it when you said come out of a busy meeting. I always try to have a little brew and sit down before I go in an interview, because if you're a bit nervous and then I get nervous and everyone's nervous, and it doesn't go for a nice interview. So chill your beans. I want to move on from kit now. So only get the kit that you need, and being DIY is fine about it. Don't worry. I bought this, you can't see it, this crappy little thing from eBay. It's a panel, just one panel. And I use it sometimes when I'm, if I want to blank some sound, like if I'm, I make like a DIY, like little vocal booth sometimes. Some people deck these everywhere, but it's a bit shit. So let's move on now to editing. And I'm going to bring in a man whose podcast title does what it says on the tin. So Steve, what's your podcast?
Thanks, Vic. Steve here, Steve Hetherington. The podcast is Alpaca Tribe.
What's it about?
It's about alpacas. I'm the only one in the world, a niche market. There are other podcasts that have got alpaca in the title, but they're about finance, or someone else who's a travel writer and they talk alpaca my bags. That's a bit of a cheat. So so Alpaca Tribe is the podcast for alpaca people. So that's what I do. You asked me to talk about editing. Now,
your first tip.
You're going to be you are really hard, Vic, giving me 2 tips and giving me 2 minutes to talk about it. So we're going to carry on learning. The first tip is about building a process. You've got to work out what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. So why do we edit? Well, we take out stuff that shouldn't be in there. We make it sound as good as it can. So we're trying to avoid distractions. The content should speak for itself. It shouldn't, what was that sound? Did you hear that? No, you don't want any of that. Take those bits out. The other thing is clarity, so the words come across, so you can actually hear what people are saying as clearly as possible. And the point that with the whole thing with it, it has to be invisible. It's the job that we do that nobody notices. If they notice it, we haven't done the job well. So that's the important thing about that. So you need to train your ears to know what sounds good. You need to listen to things, have a reference point. Have you got a really good episode that you like? It could be somebody else's, but ideally one of yours. Because after you've done a bit of editing, you're fiddled with this, and you go backwards and forwards. Is that better or is that worse? When you go to have your optician test, and can you see better? It's a bit like with sound. Is that sounding better? Is that sounding clearer? What if I push it? I pushed it too far now. I'll pull it back. So you go through this whole process of trying to make it, and you need a reference point sometimes to kind of let me listen to this. I know this sounds good, and I've got tired ears now. So okay, now I need to go back to that as that's what I'm aiming for. So know what you need to do, know how to do it, and know when to do it. So when we start cooking, we follow a recipe. Do this. So you got to do some EQ, you got to do some compression, you got to do a bit of this, got to take out all the breaths, do all that, follow somebody's recipe, and then you learn to cook, which is different. Then you work out what you need to do and how to do it with a bit more finesse and a bit more subtlety. And you're not just following a recipe anymore, because you don't always need to do EQ, you don't always need to do compression, but sometimes you do. When do you need to do it? Oh, that's a totally different conversation. So that's the first one. And and there are two types of editing, just to mention: content and quality. Content is the stuff that's in there. This comment that somebody's just made, it doesn't add to the theme it's not relevant. It's a side. Take that out. This doesn't sound right. Let's deal with that. That's a different kind of editing. And I've got a different head that I put on for that kind of editing, for the content and the quality. I'm breathless. I don't know about you. I'm glad this has been. I'm glad that's been recorded. The other one, the second tip, was about speeding up your editing. How do you? Because it doesn't take you long before you go, do you know this editing log takes such a long time? Mm-hmm. The ratio is about 4:1. Really? When I started, it was about 10:1. It just goes on for. I've taken out every tiny little bit. So how do you speed up your editing? Well, first thing is, decide in advance what you're trying to do. How long is it going to be? Don't record more than you need. If you're going to have a 10-minute episode, don't record 2 hours of tape. You just don't need it. All those decisions, I can only make so many decisions in a day. And every time I have to decide, is this in or out? Do I chop this? Do I not? This is really good, but is it the best? All of those decisions are tiring, and I run out of decision things. The biggest thing that you can do to speed up your editing is to record well. I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about editing. Oh, I'm seeing lots of people nodding their heads. Get your noise right in the first place. Get your audio sorted in the first place, and you have to do less editing. If it doesn't get in there, you don't have to take it out. Don't have the background noise. Have a mic, I've got a dynamic mic, which is the Samson Q2U, so it's not going to take in the background as much as some other mics will, which are very great. They're great for a setting where you've got no reverb, where you've got, you're in a recording studio. They're perfect. But for me, it works really well for my setting. So don't put stuff in that you have to take out. Decide how long you're going to make it. Don't make it any longer. And then what about not editing at all? Have you thought about that? No. You can't do that. That's lazy. But maybe if you get the stuff right, so you don't say, see what I did there? That was a demonstration. So don't say ums and ers. If you don't put them in, you don't have to take them out. Control your speech. Talk a little bit slower and ask good questions of your guests, which get to the point and allow them to tell their story. So that then allows you to not have to do as much editing. And then you just got to keep practicing, do a lot of it. That really helps. And perhaps go back to one of your episodes and go, that was okay. I had to do it. It was a deadline. It's out the door. But maybe if I go back, let's have another listen to that. What can I do that would make it even better? This is my learning. This isn't me going back and re-editing it for the purposes of changing what I've already published. No, I'm just learning. That bit didn't work very well. How could I make that better? Did I cut it too close? Did I leave too much of a gap? What if I did it differently? Would that improve it? Just practice. Sorry, it's a long 2 minutes.
Oh, no, I love it. Really, really good advice. Steve, just out of curiosity, how many episodes have you done of your podcast?
I've got one that's going out later this evening, if I get it finished, which will be 171.
Wow. And do you listen back to every episode?
Do I listen back to every episode? No. Not every episode. Once you got, that's a lot to go back. But I do go back. I usually try and catch it and check.
Yeah.
But I know what I've said, so I get bored. No, that's not true. But it's you go through the process, and it's difficult sometimes if you're doing a lot of editing of the same thing over and over again, to not get a bit bored and kind of, that's, I've heard that. I know what it's supposed to sound like and what I'm supposed to be saying. Oh, no, you need to put a fresh head on, and sometimes
Yeah.
to walk away and come back a little bit later and then listen through it again is a really helpful thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, I've just done a massive podcast project, and I've just gave it to someone and just said, can you listen to this? Don't tell me about any content changes. I want to know if I've left like a rogue bit of audio somewhere where I've dragged something across and I've left a jingle in or something, and it's come back and I have done that exact same thing. Just out of curiosity then, now the ratio was 10-1. So for every 10, someone once told me it's double. So however how long you record for, it'll take you double time to edit. And I think that is wrong. It takes much longer. So when you were starting out, it was 10-1. What's it like now? You're recording an hour's worth of audio.
Yeah, it's probably nearer 4-1 now. I do about sort of 20-minute episode. And it takes about an hour and a bit. And I'm careful, I try to be careful to not put the stuff in that has to come out. So just every now and again, I record. Have you done this? Record the whole thing, and then you listen back and you go, oh no, it's not the microphone. It was from the laptop. It's the whole thing is awful. Can I do anything with this? Can I fix this in post? No, you can't. You got to do it all over again. So yeah, shorter episodes are better to start with. They don't need to be too long. You can get your point across really well. Occasionally you have a really good guest and you think this is just so good. I can't throw anything away. Well, maybe you've got 2 episodes there, or maybe you've just got to be brutal and go for the, it's but every decision is a challenge to, it's demanding.
Who are you thinking of when you're making those decisions?
Oh, good question. I've got a kind of a person. So who is my audience is a good question. I don't know, but I think from the contact that I get back, it's not quite who I thought it was. And I've got people listening who are never going to have alpacas themselves. I was intending it to be for people who are owners of, got a handful of alpacas. The big breeders can take care of themselves. They got 100, 200 alpacas. Fine. They already know everything. They don't need my podcast. So this is, if you're thinking of keeping alpacas, what are the things you need to think about? If you've got alpacas and are not getting as much out of the experience as you'd like, what do you need to do that would actually move you forward, get more confidence and that kind of stuff? So that's who I'm aiming at, and that's who I'm usually trying to kind of pitch it to. But I've also got people who just love the stories that I tell about, Millie the matriarch. She's the old girl. She always leads them down the path. And you got to be careful, because if you look at her in the eye, she'll spit at you. Most alpacas, you got to work hard. No, she'll spit at you with the drop of a hat. So I'm telling these kind of stories about Millie, and I'll talk about Millie, and then next week or the week after, I'll talk about Millie again. So people come back for the stories. Yeah. And when you're doing you've got to be careful. You got to. So what I do is bring her in, and then I'll deal with her first. I'll give her the injection first, and then I'll put her out. Okay. So what have I done there? I've just given some practical advice about how to handle, don't be in a rush. They get upset and you're going to get trouble. So I'm giving practical advice, but I'm also telling the stories. So I get people who come for the stories, but also people who want the practical help as well, which kind of confused me. Who am I now telling the stories to? And I keep flipping between this person who's never going to have alpacas but loves them, and this person who's got an alpaca or 2 in their stable and don't know how to handle them and don't know what to do next. So I'm trying to kind of cater to both, and sometimes I do one more focused on one and one focused on the other.
I absolutely love that you've taken on board your knowledge of your audience, and it's changed. You've not been stubborn and gone, no, but it's for these people, but you've moved on accordingly, which is brilliant. And I love that you've incorporated characters into like invested now into like this, like a soap, we're invested in it. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions for Steve about editing? What software do you use, Steve?
Oh, now there's a good question. Currently I'm using Reaper. I was using Audition, but I'm about to ditch it because it costs 50 quid a month. We were using some of the other Adobe software for other things, so like Photoshop and Illustrator, and we were doing a book, and therefore I needed the InDesign publishing side of things. But to now justify it for the little use I'm making of I'm resizing a picture once a week. What am I don't need Photoshop for that. So £50 a month for that just feels too much. So I've just cancelled it, and I'm getting withdrawal symptoms already. But I've worked with Reaper, and that's my current one I'm using, but also use a bit of Hindenburg. Really like that. Buy it when it's on special offer in September. There's the next discount, I would guess, on that one. But on Audacity as well, because I'm also a coach for a podcast workshop. So we teach using Audacity with that, so that because it's free. So I kind of flip between them.
Yeah.
Bits and pieces.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so I'll just put loads of links. Well, I'll put the names in the chat. Audacity, free. It does what it do. I teach workshops in Audacity. It's great. Loads of top podcasters use Audacity. I'm the same as James, though. I've used Audition since it was Prolific Pro when I was at college, so I don't know any different. Like when you use something, you don't know any different. So I did actually do a course on Audacity. I went on something called Udemy, so I'll put that in the chat now, and bought a 20 quid course and got a refresher on it because I needed to learn how those guys did it. Thank you everyone that's contributed so far. Some really bloody boss advice. Next, we're going to talk about, so we now presume that you've we've planned, recorded and edited your podcast. Well done, everyone. Well done. What an achievement. Now let's talk about hosting. And I'm going to I'm going to talk about hosting, distribution and platforms. I'm going to pass over to James Marriott, when was the last time you slept, James?
So I woke up on Tuesday morning in New York. It's now Wednesday evening in Sheffield, and I've not slept in there.
It's because
there was all manner of nonsense going on in the subway yesterday as well in New York, which didn't help.
Sugar, I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was an interesting time to be there.
Oh, do you know what? I completely, well, it's so great that you're safe and sound and coming to do this for us. So as soon as you've done this, get off.
I mean, there's a fair chance I might just just fall asleep on my desk in the middle of doing this. And if any of you do, it's fine. I am struggling a bit today. So hopefully this is not going to be as entertaining as what the other people have done. But so I'm going to talk a bit about hosting and distribution. Vic asked me to do 2 tips in the way that everyone else has. And I kind of, it sort of rolled into something a little bit different because my first tip, which I might have just given to you when it comes to sorting out your podcast hosting, is prep. Now I'm going to go back a step because I think for a lot of people, and maybe even people on this call, this is like the mysterious bit. So when we talk about like hosting platforms, distribution, what does all that mean? So I'll just go back very briefly. So an audio hosting platform, I kind of describe it as it's the bit that sits in the middle between where people listen to podcasts and you recording your podcast. So you upload your podcast to your audio hosting platform, and that then kind of magically sort of distributes it to all the different apps that people listen to podcasts in. So if you've never done this before, don't worry, you don't have to upload it like 20, 30 different times to all the different apps. Your audio hosting platform takes care of it for you. But it is quite a baffling bit because it stops being about content, it stops being about the fun stuff, and it starts becoming about more of like the tech stuff. So I mean, this could apply to any stage of podcasting, really, but particularly for this, prep is really, really important. And so to kind of demonstrate this, what I'm going to do, if I've got, can I share my screen, Vic?
Yeah, I'll give you the power, one sec.
Thank you. What I'm going to do is just walk you through the different things that you need to fill in when you're setting up your audio hosting. So I use Captivate. Just let me do my screen share because I'm not going to be able to do 2 things at once today. Where is it?
Are we going to get a line tomorrow, you?
That would be lovely, wouldn't it? But it's not happening. This is it. Okay, hoping you can see that. So I use Captivate for my hosting. They are whichever hosting platform you use, they're a bit different, but because of the way the RSS feeds work, and I'm not going to go down the route of explaining what an RSS feed is, all you need to know is that the stuff that you fill in on audio hosting platforms is the same, because it's all about kind of tags and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do is effectively just start a brand new podcast now from scratch. So if I create a new podcast, these are the things that you need to have prepped. These are the things that you've got to fill in when you come to set up your podcast on your audio hosting platform. So you need a podcast name. We've kind of touched on that a little bit already tonight about the good directions to go down with your podcast name. Don't forget, you also get a podcast subtitle. To be fair, I'm trying to think what platforms the subtitle actually appears in, because I don't think any of the main platforms show a subtitle. But it's there anyway, so you can make use of your subtitle as well. Your author name, which will probably be your name, but actually if you're doing it for your business or under kind of like a bit of a brand, then you might want to put that there. Your author email address. And then selecting whether or not it's a private show. 99.9% of the time you would click no to that, because you want everyone to be able to find it. Some people, they'll like to keep their shows hidden so that they can just give specific people the RSS feed so that they can add that to their podcast app. I need to actually type something in these, don't I? So test at test.com. There we go. And no, it's not a private show. The next thing that I'm going to do is upload my cover art, and I've got a few kind of tips specifically for cover art that I'm going to put in the chat rather than talking through with you. You can see here actually just on the right-hand side of the screen that there's some tips there about your cover art has to be specific dimensions. It's much better off using a JPEG because they're smaller file sizes, and a few other tips as well. What I would say is, if you're going to do your own cover art, just get Canva, just get the free version of Canva and use their template, and that will already be the right kind of dimensions and stuff like that. So I have very conveniently already got a lovely coming soon cover art that I'm going to upload. So that's uploading. In fact, it's telling me it's over 12 kilobytes, so it might not actually work for that. But now what we're going to do is move on to the next bit of things that you need to include. So this is stuff it's really important to have prepped and ready when you're adding your show to your audio hosting. So the show description, you've got a maximum of 4,000 characters. And this is where we touched on this earlier on. I think it was Steve that was talking about this. SEO, dead important. So this is your opportunity to get in all those kind of keywords and all those things that you think people will be searching for that you want your show to match with. So you'll put your show description in there, which will be a lot better than what I've just put. And then this brings us on to our categories. So I think most audio hosts will let you pick 3 categories. For some reason, Anchor only lets you pick 1. Don't know why that is the way that it is. You've got your main category, you've got a secondary category and a third category. The list is the same for all of them. And there's loads now. A few years back when I first started in podcasting, it was a much, much shorter list. Strangely, actually, whenever I start a podcast, even though there's all these, I can never quite find the right one that fits perfectly, and that's just kind of the way that it is. So you've got all these different things that you go through and pick which category you think is the best fit for your podcast. So let's go with soccer. Then you put a secondary category and a third category, and let's pick something random there. Then we're going to do is some of the under the hood stuff. So how is your show formatted? We touched on this earlier on, actually, in terms of how often you're going to kind of do your show, whether it's episodic, which just means that maybe you're doing one every week or every month. Maybe you're doing it seasonal. So that's still episodic, but with seasons. So it might be that you release 1 to 6 in one go, or it might be that you release 1 to 6, one a week, and then you take a break. Or you've also got serial, which is the other way around, where maybe you're telling a story and you need people to start with episode 1 rather than the most recent one. Select whether or not you're going to be sweary on your podcast. make sure you get this right, because some of the apps, particularly Apple, are really not happy with people who don't mark their podcast as explicit if it has swearing in it or any kind of adult content. If you talk about adult stuff, err on the side of caution and select yes. Explicit doesn't just mean swearing, it does mean adult themed stuff as well. Default publish time, this is an interesting one actually. I actually set my default publish time to 3 a.m. now, because it takes a little bit of time for your episodes to show up on your feed, and obviously set your time zone, which is not Eastern time. That's where I was yesterday. So we'll go for London time. And finally, what's going to ask me to do is confirm my feed. So I can actually change, that's going to be my RSS feed. And this will be really important to you when you come to actually start distributing your podcast. So it will probably, whichever platform you use, will do what this does, which just automatically configures it to whatever you've called your podcast. But you could change that. So if I wanted it to be test, then I can change that. I don't think you particularly gain anything from changing it. So if I wanted to do now, then I could click create my podcast, and this would now exist in my audio hosting platform, which would then allow me to move on to the next part of kind of the behind the scenes stuff. I'm not going to create that because obviously it's a nonsense. It's a nonsense podcast. So what this really comes down to is, as I say, it's about prep. So it's about having that stuff ready in advance. So you know what your show is going to be called. You know what categories you want to be in. You've got your show description written and ready to go, so that you're not making it up on the fly. What I would say is, look, you can always go back and change this stuff. It's not set in stone. You are able to go back and edit it. So it might be that your first version of your show notes, your show description isn't brilliant, and actually you go back to it and you might fiddle with it a few days afterwards, which is absolutely fine. You can obviously do that. So that's kind of tip number 1 is prep. I'm going way over time, so I'm going to be really, really quick here. There's a little bit in the middle for my next tip, which is make sure you've got a trailer. Don't forget your trailer. I'm not going to go any more detail on that. Just make sure that you've got a trailer for your podcast. You've got to have at least one piece of audio uploaded onto your feed before you can do the next step in this kind of process of getting your show launched, which is submitting to the different apps and the different platforms. Some audio hosts are really useful and will do a lot of this work for you. They will almost all have guides that talk you through how to do it. My tip is, look, concentrate on the big 2 to start with, and they are Apple and Spotify. Apple particularly is really, really, really important. I'm going to stop my screen share now because you're probably bored of staring at that. Apple's really, really important because it also acts as kind of like an aggregator for quite a lot of other podcast apps, particularly ones on Android devices. So a lot of other podcast apps basically just borrow Apple's API. So once you're on Apple Podcast, you will actually find your podcast starts to appear on loads of apps that you've probably never even heard of. So it is really worth spending the time to make sure that particularly Apple and Spotify, which is a much easier platform to get on, are done and there's no problems and you're approved and on them. Other ones that are worth mentioning, Amazon, which allows your podcast to be played through those smart speakers that I'm not going to say the name because it'll go off behind me, and Google Podcasts as well, which is also a fairly similar one. If you probably already got some kind of Google account or Gmail account or something like that you can use. If you remember before when we set up the RSS feed, that's the bit that's the really important thing. So that's the thing that's going to create a link in these different podcast apps back to the work that you're doing in your audio hosting platform. So they're my 2 tips: prep and really concentrate on making sure that you are on Apple and Spotify without any errors and any problems, ready for your launch. Sorry, I rambled there, but
no, it was
sleep
really
deprivation.
Useful. And I was just saying to Charles before he came on, I said, you need to show me Captivate. I want a little tour around it. So I was geeking up on that as well. So playing devil's advocate with you here, James, a little bit.
Yep.
So it's one of the biggest, hottest topics in podcast land is hosting. Go to any Facebook group and it's like, what host do I use? What host do I use? What host do I use? Say if I went with Audio Boom or I went with Anchor, would I still get on Apple Podcasts? Would I still go on Spotify? Would they all basically do the same thing?
They all basically do the same thing, yeah. So there are a few free platforms out there. I think Anchor's probably the most well-known of them. There's another couple as well. Generally, the free platforms all work on kind of like a freemium model where they like limit the amount of audio that you can upload in a month, or they limit the number of downloads that you're allowed, so the number of people that can listen to your podcast, there's a limit on it. And most of them will find some way to move you onto a paid tier within the first probably couple of years. If people are listening to your platform, then they'll listen to your podcast, then they'll probably move you on. But they all work in the same kind of way, in that you have an RSS feed, and that kind of creates that bridge between where you upload your audio and where people listen to it. Your listener, by the way, has absolutely no idea which audio hosting platform you use, really. Some of the free ones will stick their own adverts on the beginning, and maybe some do it in the middle as well, in which case that it probably does have an impact on your listener, and that's maybe something that is worth bearing in mind. If you're going to go down the free route, honestly, there's only really Anchor that I would particularly consider. I'm a fan of Captivate because I'm really good friends with the guys that built it, and I actually worked for the company when they were building it. So, I kind of had a very small part to play in saying, it really annoys me that audio hosting platforms don't do this, and why I can't do that, and why I can't do the other. And they fixed all those issues with Captivate. So I'm a little bit biased, but their model in terms of how much you pay is done by number of downloads. And I think I'm not keen on ones that you have to pay for storage, because it doesn't really matter whether your podcast is dead successful or not. Like, everyone pays the same. When your audio host needs your podcast to be successful to kind of move you up to that next paid tier, it means that they're going to go out of their way to provide tools that help you grow your podcast. The more listeners you get into the podcast, the better it is for them. So that feels like a really kind of healthy sort of approach to it. So if you're kind of looking around and considering different ones, personally, I'd say stay away from ones that charge you per storage or give you like an audio allowance, and actually look at the ones where you think, do you know what, they're going to want my show to do well, because that means that they're going to be able to get more money out of me. That, I think, is the healthier kind of route.
And these things aren't set in stone either, are they? And there's a guy on here who knows all about moving. We've talked about loads of times on here about moving podcast hosts, but it's not hard to move a podcast host, is it? You just lose of your stats.
That's the only downside to it. Yeah. So moving audio host has got much easier actually in the last few years. That they all, most of them, you don't need to kind of speak to customer service or anything like that. You do a redirect on your feed. You kind of keep them both running consecutively for a few weeks, and then you can cancel the old one. And again, your listeners never know any of this stuff. No. It just all happens automatically. But yeah, just bear in mind the fact that if you spend a lot of time poring over your stats and comparing episodes, if you move audio host, you're starting from zero again. So you can still kind of manually create a copy of your old stats.
You're not losing your listeners, you're just losing your listener numbers, like that only you know them as well. You can just copy them onto an Excel spreadsheet. So that's not.
Of course you can, yeah. And anyone that like follows or subscribes to your podcast, they continue to do that. It doesn't make any difference from a listener experience point of view.
One of the biggest questions in all this is how long it takes. So from how long do you give it in your, because you write podcasts for a living with clients and that, how long do you say from setting your podcast hosting up to launching? What's your ideal time frame?
I'm not sure if there's a single answer for that. What I always say is, once we've kind of, if I'm working with someone, once we've nailed the format and we know what the podcast is going to be, then I'll say, right, let's get the trailer done. Let's get the audio hosting set up. Let's get the show submitted. Doesn't matter if we're not going to do an episode for another 2 or 3 months or something like that. Let's get that bit done. And then that kind of like, I mean, I call it the boring tech side of it. I actually quite enjoy it. Most of the people don't. But once that's kind of done, you can just sort of forget about it there. It's done, it's in the background, and that's a big hurdle that's cleared. I've had people that have come to me, and I've ended up working with them, who've spent 6 months trying to get the podcast launched. It's all done and ready. They just can't figure out the audio hosting side of it. So just get that stuff done. And then it doesn't really matter how long after that it takes for you to kind of get your other ducks in a row to be able to kind of launch your show. I guess to pluck something out of thin air, a couple of months would probably be a good kind of time
Wow.
from launching your trailer to getting everything else ready. We're straying into other territory here, but I always say to people, you want to be at least 2 or 3 episodes ahead. Ideally, you want to be 5 or 6 episodes ahead all the time, regardless of how often you're creating content. I agree very much with what Charlotte said about I'm quite into this sort of binge culture of like Netflix effect of, why not just drop 6 in one go? Why not just concentrate on creating a season, perfecting it, and then you release it when it's ready and it's done, and then you've got no kind of time pressures after that. So I'm not sure it matters that much really how long it takes from kind of doing the tech to actually then launching.
And then 2 more questions for you, then I'm going to let you go. One is about, I don't know what the one was. One is about episode titles. Jill asked this question a while ago. How important? No, do you follow any sort of hard and fast rules when it comes to doing your episode titles?
It's a little bit like the conversation earlier about what do you call your podcast? What is that top level name for your podcast? And episode titling is sort of the same, whereby if you think, I always use the example of every episode of Friends was always called The One With, and then something. It was often something a little bit cryptic, wasn't it? And it was cute, but the thing is, Friends had already got the audience. Didn't really matter what they called the episodes. So you've got 2 directions that you can go down. You can create clever play on word episode titles, or you can just keep it pretty kind of down the line and straight. SEO is so important in this equation, and what I kind of try and do with clients, and it was interesting earlier, and I can't remember who it was that kind of mentioned this, but what I'll kind of do if I'm working with, I tend to work with businesses. So what I'll kind of do is go, right, okay, well, what area of business are you in? What's your industry? And go on something like Answer the Public or some kind of site where you can reverse engineer what are people actually searching for in relation to this subject, to this area. And if the most Googled question is, how long does it take to buy a house? You've got your episode title there. However you go about putting an episode together, make your episode title what people are actually looking for. That's your ideal scenario. Then you've got the most chance of finding those people that you want to listen to it. So at the end of it, they go, I really like the advice that they're giving me there. I might get in contact with them, or I might download their free ebook from the website that they mentioned there in the call to action, or whatever it is. It's a little bit different because I say I produce podcasts for businesses rather than necessarily people that are kind of doing it maybe as like a hobby or kind of like a side hustle or something like that. But it's still good practice, isn't it? Try and title your episode with the thing that people are actually going to be looking for, over and above kind of something that's really clever or really funny. Your subscribers, your followers will still get those episodes. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's always about finding those new listeners, and that's what we're all kind of in the business of doing, isn't it? And podcast SEO is not as complex as like Google SEO and stuff like that. If you go on Apple Podcasts and you search for a phrase, it just brings you up podcast episode. You're not in competition with loads of other different bits of content like you are on Google. So the more kind of to the point and straightforward you can be in episode titling, probably the more chance you've got of finding people that are looking for you.
Brilliant advice. Thank you very much, James. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, James Marriott, podcast strategist from We Are Sound Media. Thank you very, very much. And thank you so much for your stamina and your dedication to the cause.
There's a lot of caffeine going on here.
Go and have a little lay down now.
I'm going to do.
Go and have your tea. Okie dokie. Thank you very much, James. And finally, the last stage of making your podcast is getting those first listens. And I want to bring Caroline Verdon on. She is the presenter, producer, extraordinaire behind At Least You Didn't podcast. And she's also a voiceover artist and radio presenter extraordinaire. A lot of extraordinaires in this introduction, Caroline.
I mean, wow. Thanks very much. Yeah.
So I invited you to talk about getting those first listens. So we've planned it, we've recorded it, we've edited it, it's on the host. Now what?
So I think this is a step that's so easy to miss and to just go, I've made my podcast and now here it is. And actually, I think you look at all of the work that you've put in, and as we've gone through tonight, there's so much work that goes into every single step. This is the part that you really want to shout about just how great your podcast is and make sure that you get those listens. So I would say there are two really important things. Firstly, make a launch plan. So I would normally suggest a 2-week plan. And within that, you're looking at, let's get stuff on social media every single day. Let's contact, depending on your podcast, let's contact media organizations or magazines or whatever is relevant for your content. It could be, a charity, whatever the niche is. But just making sure that there is something that other people will get excited about, that there's a countdown, that there are clips of audio going out, there's images of what your actual graphic is going to look like, and you plan that in so there is no day that doesn't go without something. And then and it's really hard condensing it into just 2 points. So I would say the second thing is have a specific launch day and time, and make it really easy for people to find your podcast. I think sometimes, if you're asking people to search the podcast, you might think that could be really easy. Just type it in Apple, just type it in Spotify. But some people, it is not easy for them. And I think we just need to make it so simple so that there can't be any mistakes. So, if you are making posters for your podcasts, then stick a QR code on it so people can just, screenshot the QR code or whatever. Use your podfollow links, which means that if anybody is unaware of podfollow, if you go to podfollow.com, type in the name of your podcast, you will end up with one link that if you click on it on an Apple phone will take you, for example, to Apple. If you click on it on an Android, you can choose for it to take you to Spotify. If you click on it on a laptop or a computer, it will take you to perhaps your podcast host or your podcast website. But it's just one link and you can make it really simple. You can choose what it is. So it can literally be podfollow.com / the name of my podcast, whatever that may be. And I think just bearing that in mind, that so many people are still not aware of podcasts and they don't understand where to find them, and they don't know where it, how to get it. Perhaps you do, as part of your launch plan, some videos for how to find a podcast or that kind of thing, just to make sure that it is as simple as possible. So when you say we launch Wednesday 8 o'clock, at Wednesday at 8 o'clock, people know exactly what they're doing.
So the first week of your podcast launch, Caroline, last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so
first podcast was last year.
What happened? What was the success of that first little? So that was really pretentious. What's it been like? That first flurry of marketing. What was the result of that?
So the result was that we got quite a lot of. We got some website press from it. We got some things in some online magazines. We knew that it gave us a really big flurry on the first couple of days for people downloading the podcast, which helps if you're bothered with charts. This podcast was a comedy podcast, and we were quite bothered with the charts for that podcast. Other podcasts that I've done have not been in that kind of area. I've done stuff for the NHS and stuff for all sorts of different, and you're not bothered about charts. But if you're bothered about charts, you want to get that flurry at the very, very beginning of people all logging on at the same time to download and listen to your podcast. You want to be putting up 2 or 3 episodes so that they can binge it to an extent, or all your episodes, because suddenly the charts go, this is really interesting. Loads of people are listening to this particular podcast. Why? And so it finds its way up the chart. And that can help. It's interesting. A lot of people talk about wanting to get on Apple's new and noteworthy section. I'm not sure how I'm not sure how useful that is. It means that if you were to open the app, there's your podcast, it's there and everyone will see it first of all. But I think having spoken to quite a few people who have done it, what you tend to find is that there's a flurry of people who will listen to it, but they weren't your audience in the first place. So you might find that there's a flurry who listen and then they disappear. So that doesn't really help you long term. And actually you're much better building your audience, going to those places that you know your audience will be, or your potential audience will be, and saying, hey, look, I've got something that I think you're going to love, and getting those people to listen. And knowing them, throughout every single step of the process, keeping them in your mind and knowing who they are is really key.
When are you thinking about this marketing then? What stage of your podcast are you thinking about marketing?
I kind of think of it on and off throughout the whole process. So, for example, I did one a few months ago, back end of last year, which was for the NHS, and it was on neonatal units and for parents who have premature or poorly babies. And from the start, we started thinking about the launch because we realized that actually November the 17th is Prematurity Awareness Day. So it's like, right, okay, there's going to be hype and there's going to be loads of organizations looking to find an angle on this. So actually, let's launch on that day because that's going to help us out. That's going to be an easier way into local and national media and to get kind of the podcast out there. But also when we were then going through and recording the interviews, it's thinking about it because it's like, oh, somebody there has said something really interesting, and my brain will then go, oh, that might make a good graphic, or I can make a little note and we'll use the video clip from this because that'll make a good clip. So it's thinking about it the whole way along, but then once I've kind of got to that point where there are rough edits of the episodes, then I sit down and I actually write a plan. And it might start off as a pen and paper and a bit of a rubbishy brainstorm, but it will eventually end up as a Word document, because I hate Excel, but it will eventually end up as a Word document with different days, what social media platforms we're using and why, and what's going on where and at what time. So the whole way through. I think it's really important. And for me, I find that really frustrating because I love making audio, and that's the bit that I really get excited about. And I love planning it, and I love doing the interviews and doing the editing. And then actually all of that was a total waste of time if nobody knows that you've done anything. And that's why it's so important to spend a good chunk of time, I think, on doing all of that.
Yeah, brilliant advice, Caroline. And I was really wanted to chat to you, get your opinion for the community as well, because you had so much success with that launch of the podcast. At least you didn't, and continue to do so as well. So and it's not, marketing can't be an afterthought. Build it and they shall not come.
Exactly. And
then as they saw, we're going to come full circle now, because this then all links now to your audience, and who are your audience, and where are they? Where do they hang out? What messaging do they resonate with? And what are they gonna? What's going to grab them? I was having this conversation the other day about Twitter posts and how it's we've got a new episode out. Don't listen to it. Don't forget we've got a new episode out. Don't listen to it. Don't forget we've got a podcast. It becomes white noise. It's not speaking to me as a potential audience. I want to invest my time and delve into your podcast. We're nearing now the end. Thank you so much, Caroline. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it. When we do the follow-up email, we're sending links out to everyone's podcasts who's contributed to tonight. So thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it. Charles, I'll put you on the spot now, haven't I?
Sorry, no, I just need to change my view so that I can see everybody and say, hi, I'm back. Yes, thank you everybody for tonight. Thank you to all our contributors, those who have dropped off because it's bedtime, James, and those who are still here and have been here all the way through, and also to everybody that is obviously here, has been listening, has been contributing in the chat. everything has made tonight a really, really good event, I think. And that's down to you guys. So thank you so much for coming along and sharing your expertise, asking your questions, and everything like that. So thank you so much with that. Please remember, we do regular meetups. So this happens every single month. We do a different topic most months, and sometimes we'll just do an open Q&A, which is what we're doing in May. So if you've got any questions about podcasting, it could be about how to do a particular aspect of it or something that is actually in relation to your podcast, then come along, ask the community your question, and I guarantee you that somebody in this Zoom room right now, and the one that we'll have open in May, will be able to help you answer it. And they'll do that through using their own experiences of making really great podcasts. So do come along. You've already signed up, hopefully, to the meetup page, meetup.com/MIC pod. You'll be able to see all of the stuff. If you can also make sure that you allow us to send you emails, then you'll get a regular kind of reminder as well when the next event is happening and anything else. So we try our hardest to send out an email after the event when the replay is available, for example. If you've got your email notifications turned on from us, then you'll know when that happens first. So that would be absolutely lovely. If you feel like you have learned anything at all from this session, or that you just particularly love me and more so Vic with her lovely new hair, then you can buy us a coffee to help support us to carry on and keep doing this monthly event. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/Mike's Podcast Club. Link is in the chat. That's lovely. £4 a brew. It just helps us go towards, pay for Zoom, a bit of our time, all of the normal sort of stuff that you would think. Essentially, it's just like running a podcast, free to listen to, but not free to create. So thank you. If you could all go and do that. I mean, it would just make me and Vic smile from ear to ear. We would beam. So there's going to be a lot going on online in a few weeks' time. Over on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to watch this replay if you'd like to do that. And you can also go back and watch the last two events. So we had last month, it was all about podcast marketing. That was with Ariel Nissenblatt. So she is a fabulous podcast marketeer, works for Squadcast, which is a bit like Zencaster that Amy mentioned earlier on, where you can remote record online. But she is brilliant. If you haven't found her on Twitter yet, then you really, really should. Ari this and that is her handle over on Twitter. But go on the YouTube channel, Mike's Podcast Club, and watch the event that we held last month with her. There was so much that I took away from that event. And I've been doing, podcasting professionally for, nearly 4 or 5 years now. So there was so much to unpack in that. Please go and watch. And the one before that was with Matt Deegan and a few of our community members on how to and why you should enter a podcast award, like the British Podcast Awards. The entries just closed at the beginning of this week. So do go and have a look at that. Do go check it out. Make sure you give a thumbs up on the video. All that YouTube nonsense that they tell you to do on their videos. Thumbs up, hit the subscribe and the bell icon to be notified of next videos. They don't all sound northern and ridiculous, just me. So we've got that going on up there. Our next event is on the 11th of May. Go and RSVP to that straight away so that we know that you're coming. And finally, social media stuff. At Mike's Podcast Club on Twitter, and you can join the Facebook group on Facebook. Search Mike's Podcast Club, and someone, me or Vic, will essentially let you in. We do have a little rule: come to 2 events, and you'll get straight into that group. And basically, that's like having this, but at your disposal every single moment of every single day. So there's loads of good stuff, loads of people put lots of good tips on there outside of this meetup. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. You are all beautiful, lovely, wonderful podcast peeps. I will see you in May.